Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the backyard plant propagation series that I've been shooting for a while. It's finally time to actually start taking cuttings. It's about right at the beginning of June. Usually I can start around mid-May in my area, but we got a late frost, set everything back a little bit. So it's early June, just getting started on it. I'm in my commercial propagation greenhouse, which is a mess right this minute because everything just came out of it. I'll show you those rooted cuttings in a minute before I get started on this. All I use when I'm taking cuttings is this little pair of Corona snips. It's AG 4930. I'll link them in the description of this video. You can use these all day long when you're doing plant propagation. They're super sharp. They're almost disposable because they're very inexpensive, and you can use them all day without any hand fatigue. And then I just use a basic 13-gallon trash bag. You don't need the pull tie on it. It's just what I had available right this second. So here are last year's rooted cuttings. We've just taken them out of the greenhouse and we're acclimating them under a shade cloth for a couple of weeks. Then we'll acclimate them to full sun and then go ahead and start planting them. That house is a 34 by 72 foot house, and you can see how many flats we can do in there. All these are 50 cell trays. Some of them are 60 cell trays. We probably root about 80% of what we stick, somewhere in that neighborhood. A lot of things we'll get 100% on, but then there's some really tricky things that I don't know why. I probably should just buy them from somebody else, but I continue to try them and we'll only get about 50% on some things. But all of these are going to be deciduous and evergreen flowering shrubs. The way I go about determining that it's time to actually take cuttings on these is I want semi-hardwood cuttings. I do not want the oldest growth down in the bottom. It will root, but it takes a long time for it to root. And I don't want the most tender new growth from the very early spring. It will root as well, but you have to handle it very carefully. If you make any mistake with this super tender growth here, you get into trouble really quickly. What I want is where that new growth has hardened off just a little bit, but hasn't actually become this woody color that's on the interior of this plant. So I can take a cutting about this far down, and while I'm in the field collecting the cuttings, I'll go ahead and take off that newest growth. That is almost a prepared cutting, and I'm gonna put that into my 13-gallon garbage bag, and then go ahead and take several more while I'm at it. Another thing, the most important thing, is this is a healthy, vigorous, growing plant. I actually love to take cuttings off of my stock that's in the field where I know it's well fertilized and well managed. I do take cuttings from plants that are in the ground, but I make sure they're vigorous, they don't have insect problems, they don't have disease problems. A lot of what goes on taking cuttings is you had 50 plants and you sold the 45 best ones, and then you proceeded to take cuttings off the 5 worst plants you had. You're definitely over time going to get a diminishing return. We want to take cuttings off very healthy plants. I will frequently put a plant aside that I know I would have sold, I know I could have made money on, hello yellow jacket, and make sure that it's there for me to take cuttings off of when I'm ready for it. This plant right here, I'm going to be able to get as many as 30, 40 cuttings off of it when I take azalea cuttings. I'm not quite ready for azaleas at this point, but this is how I do it. I'll go ahead and kind of prep these before I put them in the bag. That's what I'm left with. So here's some more examples of this. This is a sky pencil holly, and you can see from the top of it, I've topped it off several times in the past. This very tender growth right up here on the top is not what I'm looking for. This old growth where the color changes to that gray color, not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this piece that's right in the center, and I can actually get 2 cuttings off of each of these stems. I'll cut it down to here. I'll cut this into 2 sections, probably 3 inches long, and I'll discard the newest, most tender growth on the top of it. I'll stick that in my bag and keep working. These sky pencils you can make very quick work of. Right here to the right of that is a dwarf Burford holly. I got the same thing going on this stem right here. This newest tender growth out here on the end is just not ready. I'll take that off and I'll be left with a stem about that long. I'll take these bottom couple of leaves off of it when I cut it, and I'll stick that in the bag. This piece I can actually get a couple cuttings off of before it changes to the harder old wood. one important factor here is I want to get similar pieces. Even if I have to take some of that hardwood, if the plant was too small, I definitely want to mix all the hardwood cuttings into one flat and all the semi-hardwood cuttings, which are these green stem pieces here that are firm but not woody yet. And if I was going to do softwood cuttings, which sometimes we do have to do, I make sure that I put nothing but softwood cuttings in the flat, because I'm going to end up having to water them differently. I'm going to end up having to keep one in that greenhouse longer than another, so we definitely don't want those end up mixing those in the same flat. So this is a Ruby loropetalum, and this most purple growth out here on the end, again, is too soft. Back in here, this hardwood cutting, it'll definitely root. Like I say, it'll definitely root, but it takes a lot longer. Right in this area right here, we have about 6 or 8 inch piece right in there that's absolutely perfect for rooting quickly at the end of spring or early summer. Now for a couple of deciduous shrubs that lose their leaves in the wintertime. This hydrangea right here has some leaf spot on the leaves. I am not about to take cuttings on that. I'll end up spreading that to all the other hydrangeas in the greenhouse. I'm going to find a healthy, vigorous plant with very clean foliage and take the cuttings on it. And again, right up here at the top, I don't want that most tender new growth. I want this piece right here, about 2 or 3 sections down. Here's a Japanese beautyberry. These deciduous shrubs like beautyberries, spireas, butterfly bushes, hydrangeas, all are really very easy to root, quite honestly. We just, like I say, I wouldn't take that newest growth somewhere. This plant's already grown about 1 foot since it leafed out this spring, and about the bottom 7 or 8 inches of that growth is the ideal place to get cuttings from. It's really best not to take more cuttings than you can do that day. And after I get what I'm going to do that morning, I will put the water in the bag like this. I've actually already torn a hole in the corner, and I'll let most of that water drain out of the bottom like that, and then I'll tie off the top of the bag, and I'll put this bag in a shady place. It doesn't have to be very cool if you're going to do the cuttings that morning. If you're going to try to hold them over and do them the following day or something like that, you might want to put them in an air-conditioned space, and I'll just trap whatever moisture is left in this bag by sealing it off. So that's the basics of collecting the material for the cuttings. Next week I'll have the flats filled, the plastic on the greenhouse, and we'll go ahead and start finishing off these cuttings, getting them in the flats, and getting some irrigation on them. The main point that you need to take from this video, make sure your tool is clean that you're using. Just use a new bag. These bags are very inexpensive. Just use a new one every day. Dispose of that old one. We don't want any potential disease issues that we're picking up while we're taking cuttings, jumping from the bag to the bag to the bag. We want to try to keep it as sterile as possible. Make sure you're taking cuttings off of healthy plants, no insects, no disease problems, no spots on the leaves, that kind of thing, if you can avoid it. Healthy, vigorous growing plants produce the best rooted cuttings. So I hope this video was helpful. Please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for future videos. Thanks for watching. Want some water?